New York Giants fans. Welcome back to the Everything New York Giants podcast with New York Giants fangirl. I'm your host, Adriana. Today, we are recapping the second Hard Knocks episode and then also talking about the last 20 out of the top 100 New York Giants that are being counted down this offseason by the organization. So let's get right into it, starting with Hard Knocks. This episode was another fantastic episode. I think what we're seeing, all the behind the scenes, is so different than anything we've seen from the Giants before, and even from what we've seen from Hard Knocks before, because it's the offseason versus the regular season. So I think it's just a great inside look. For the people complaining about it, get a life. You must complain about everything, because I think it's fun. And I think everyone should watch it. So let's talk about a couple things. First thing, I want to talk about McKinney, because during this offseason part, this was still end of February when they are at the Combine. There is quite a bit of talk from Joe Schoen, Brandon Brown. They're talking about potentially bringing back McKinney. He even talks to Jerome Henderson about it. So obviously at this point, they're weighing all their options. Of course, they're still including Saquon in the mix. But I thought it was really interesting that at that point, they seemed like they did want to bring back McKinney. So I think we kind of all felt like if they had to choose between one, maybe they were going to go for McKinney, just because he didn't really have the injury history and he had a great year compared to Saquon. So I don't know, but I just thought it was interesting that, especially once they got the salary cap number, that Schoen was talking about McKinney right away along with Saquon. So obviously we know how that worked out. I think the Giants were never going to give him the money that he got from the Packers, even though they liked him and did want to bring him back. But we all knew the reality with the Giants this offseason is, yes, they had that bump in salary cap, but it just was not enough for them. So, and all the holes that they had to fill. Something else that I loved that they really focused on when talking about the draft and talking about the Combine and, the different players that they were interviewing with, and Hannah Burnett, a scout, talked about this as well, that they had a big focus on the personality, the character, and who these people are as people versus only as a player. And you get that from Joe Schoen when he talks a little bit about really loving Odunze, and you can tell he has a little bit of that concern with Nabers until after they have the interview with Nabers, and then he goes ahead and says, I expected more edge from him. Like, I can't believe that he was so reserved in person versus what they see on the field. So I think that interview, and the more that they talked to Nabers, that solidified it for Schoen. And also the fact that Dable loved him. I mean, there's a clip where you see Dable talking to Schoen and telling him, I just watch a ton of Nabers tape. That guy's a baller. He is incredible, and talks about how much he really likes him. So, at the end of the day, it is Dable's offense, and I think that it was the right move. If he really loved Nabers, then that was the right move for them. You guys know I loved Odunze, but I do think that Nabers is going to be a beast on the field, so I'm excited about that. Let's talk about Saquon briefly. I know this is at the end of the episode, but I just want to get it over with and move on, and then we'll talk about the Combine after that. So what I thought was interesting, too, is I have a PR background, and, watching Shane and Dion and Maddie, the two of them prepare Schoen for the press conference and, what he should say, and him making the joke about, he was going to say that, I offered Saquon this money a year ago and he turns it down, and you could see Dion was like, oh God, please don't say that. And Shane's like, no, I'm not going to say that. But, little behind the scenes like that it's really important. And, a lot of people who end up speaking to the media and things like that, they need media training. So I thought that was interesting that they talked about, anticipating the questions and how Schoen was going to go about answering them. Obviously, especially in regards to the Saquon thing, because we knew that was going to be a hot topic. That conversation at the end of the episode with Saquon and Schoen was so incredibly awkward that I was almost had secondhand embarrassment, and I was like, I can't believe that we are listening to this. I feel like I am in the room, hiding in the corner, eavesdropping, not supposed to be watching this. What I took from that was Saquon didn't care. He's not invested. He didn't want to be a Giant anymore. And listen, I don't harbor bad feelings towards Saquon if he didn't want to be a Giant. My problem is you just lied about it the whole time. You know what I mean? just be honest. I think that he knew in the middle of the season that he wasn't going to get the money that he wanted to get. And, you know, he has this reputation of always doing the right thing in the media and everything to the fans and whatever. He always goes about things the right way. And I think that he tries to do that, but then behind the scenes, like you see the conversation with Shane, you see when you look at the numbers of what the Giants offered him in 2023 versus what the Eagles gave him, it's literally the same thing. There's a $1.25 million difference. So again, if you only care about the money, that's fine. Like I don't expect these guys who have not a long time to play in the NFL to sit and take, you know, pay breaks, because like I would never take a pay break from my company either. Like I get it, but you know, I wouldn't be out here saying like I want to be a Giant for life, knowing that the Giants are probably not going to go up on their offer, and they're talking about the franchise tag still being on the table. Franchise tag was $12 million, so you know, you wanted $13 million. I don't know. So anyway, that annoyed me because I just kind of felt like, you know, he's been portraying this one side of things to the fans and everything, and then behind the scenes, that's not what he means. And I mean, whatever, that's his prerogative. He's not our problem anymore. So the other thing I wanted to note on this is that I think from these meetings that we've seen from the front office staff, what I think we really gathered is that no one had any idea what the market was going to be, especially in regards to running backs. And I think that's how it is every year. I think they can plan a little bit here and there based on last year, based on the tag numbers and things like that. But at the end of the day, you have no idea what other teams are willing to pay another player. Just like the Giants were like, well, I'm going to go up to a certain number with McKinney. He got X amount more from the Packers. We all agreed as a fan base that that was probably more money than McKinney thought he would get, and that we all probably thought it was worth. Now, we're not GMs, but still, I think you get that side of things that's like there's a very unpredictable aspect to free agency. So getting to see again the behind the scenes of that, I thought was really interesting. And I genuinely think that Shane and some of the other guys thought that there was no chance in hell that Saquon was going to get $10+ million a year, maybe 10 and a half. But you know, you hear Shane say, well, and I think this was in the first episode, I don't want to franchise him and then try to trade him and then be stuck paying him $12 million a year. Like, he obviously thought that $12 million was too expensive for Saquon, and he's thinking, well, who's going to trade for him at that price? So anyway, that was eye-opening. Next up, let's talk about the combine, because I loved everything about this. The first thing I want to talk about that I thought was really eye-opening as to how the organization is run right now is the relationships and the camaraderie between everyone. The front office staff, the scouts, the coaches, everyone seems to not only be on the same page, but they're all like open to feedback, seem very generous with each other, very like authentic, like they can joke around and make jabs at each other. Like the way that everyone ganged up on Dable, which was hysterical to me and honestly true, that he has no chance of running a 7-second 40 time. It was just funny, and it like you can see them all making jokes and laughing and just knowing that like no one was gonna go home and like punch their door because they were upset about the jokes. And it just makes me think that the Dave Gettleman, Joe Judge era, A, never would have made it on Hard Knocks, and B, was just the complete opposite of this. And when you hear these reports that came out later about Gettleman running the show and this, that, and the other thing, it's like it just feels very familial, like, you know, like if you have siblings, you know, you can joke around with them and beat on them, but like if they were in trouble, you would help them, and you can get along with them and tell jokes and stories and all sorts of things. It felt very much like that, and I just think we haven't been privy to that being on the outside. So to get to see that made me feel like everyone really respects each other and respects their opinion. With that being said, I want to talk about Kafka, because There are a couple scenes at the combine where they're in the box and Dable is sitting there and I think there's a scout next to him and Kafka's on the other side. And everyone is making jabs at Dable when he's saying that he thinks he can run a 7-second 40 time. And, you know, I think Tim McDonald's like, I saw you run across the street. There's no shot in hell. And Joe Shane is like, dude, Dable says that how about him versus Worthy? Like, which yard would he have to start at in order for him to beat Worthy? And he's like, I think probably the 20 yard. And Shane is like, dude, you have to be at the 35 yard. Everyone is making jokes, and Kafka is there drinking his water, seemingly not paying attention and not involved in the conversation. And I didn't notice that the first time around. I have watched it twice. When I watched it the second time, and it's funny because my cousin, Krista, said to me, you know, I thought it was odd that we didn't see a lot of Kafka. And after she said that, I was like, I didn't really realize that until I went back and watched. And then when you watch and you see that he is not involved in the conversation, and then there's another scene where he's not there and everyone is still joking about the 40 time, I was like, this is very interesting. So I'm curious to see how much more of Kafka we will see, because we have seen more of Shane Bowen, and you see Bowen and Dable sitting next to each other and the way that they're conversing. And, you know, there was a talk about Burns and Tyler Nubin and how much, you know, Dable and Shane looked like a kid in a candy store. Like, oh my God, I'd be happy with either one of them. So I thought that was really interesting, especially when they were talking, when Shane and Dable were talking about Odunze versus Nabers. Like, Kafka seems like he wasn't in that conversation at all. And just because we didn't see it doesn't mean that that's not true. But I just kind of thought like, oh, this is very interesting. So I'm curious to see how that goes through the next couple episodes. But very interesting. Okay, something else I want to talk about with Dable is I have had my concerns for him taking on play calling, because I think we can all agree that he has some concerns as a head coach. Obviously, he's not perfect. I don't expect him to be perfect, but, you know, clock management, a couple other issues. So I am worried about him taking on the play calling. But one thing that was abundantly clear to me when we were watching him interview the quarterbacks, his football IQ is through the roof. Unbelievable. And that kind of made me feel like, okay, maybe I feel better about Dable calling the plays now, because I just know that he knows so much about the game and he knows so much about how to bring the best out of players. Like when they were talking about what he did with Favre and Josh Allen, like, and Tua and Jalen Hurts, I just was like, okay, maybe I'll give him a little bit of a break and he's going to be fine calling the plays. And you just see that he really understands the game and is so football smart that I'm like, oh my God, can we just get this fucking offensive line to work? Because I want to see Dable, now I want to see him call the plays, command this offense, and do things his way, because I feel like maybe we'll be good if he does that. So it looks like it's going to be the case, because I think he's going to call the plays this year. Let's talk about Joe Shane in regards to the combine, because when he goes over to New England, Elliott Wolf, to talk about moving down from 6 to 3. It's either before or after that conversation, they show him in the hallway on the phone. I don't know who he's talking to. Maybe Mara. But he's saying that, you know, if Jones is not ready to go, because this is back in February, if Jones isn't ready to go, and let's say, you know, he's out the first 3 games, and we go 0-3, I need a quarterback. This was his direct words. DJ's coming off an injury. I need a backup quarterback who can be available, or we look to draft one. So I thought that was very telling, because I think at this point, like, they had some sort of plan, but they just didn't fully know, because they didn't know where DJ was going to be in his rehab. And I think they also felt like Joe Shane repeatedly talked about, we need to protect ourselves and we need to protect Jones. So part of me feels like maybe they were thinking, knowing the Chargers, that yes, they could have gone wide receiver, but at the time, Alt was still really in the mix, and there was a lot of talk about the Chargers potentially going after Alt. So I think it shouldn't be ruled out that if they were going to trade down from 6 to 3, maybe wide receiver was off the table, or it was Marvin Harrison only, or they were going to go Joe Alt. And I know, you know, they talk about the quarterback thing. Maybe they were going to draft a quarterback. But then you hear Dable say, like, there was so much that I was like, this could go 100 different ways. Because then you hear Dable say to Jaden Daniels, let's say you're going 0-3, coming off a tough season. It's a really bad start. The New York media is challenging you and, talking shit about you in the papers. How are you going to handle it? So then I'm like, well, maybe they were really thinking about drafting a quarterback. Like if they thought they got to 3, then they would have gone for May or Daniels, whoever was going to be available. So I think that at that point, maybe they didn't really know, and they were, looking at all of their different options, had a bunch of different plans to see, which way the table was going to swing. But I really feel like after seeing this, that they could have gone for 3 different players if they ended up at 3, and maybe it wasn't set in stone that they were just going to go after May. So I don't know. I think it's very interesting. Also, something, we talked about this briefly earlier, but Shane loved Odunze, and when you see that conversation with him, I was like, oh, I loved Rome. But Nabers, I think, is going to be fine. So now let's talk a little bit more about Dable. We can end on this here. Dable tells Nabers that he likes guys who are dogs. He wants them to win. He poses the same sort of question that he did to Jaden Daniels. Like, let's say you're having a slow start to the season and you're not getting the ball as much as you would. How are you going to handle that? And, what are you going to do if this team starts out losing? And, Nabers, I think, had a good answer and said that he hates losing more than he loves winning. And him and Dable kind of went back and forth. And I felt like that conversation, I think it showed his competitiveness, which I really obviously want to see from all of these players. But, I think in the interviews, Rome came off a little bit better. I mean, I really liked him, and I was sad he went to the Bears. But Nabers is going to be fine. We have seen his talent on the field. The fact that Dable was so gung-ho about him makes me feel really good about it, because obviously Dable watched a ton of tape on him and knows what's going to work for this offensive scheme. So I am excited about Nabers. The last thing that I will say on this that I thought was really funny is during that conversation, Dable says, I don't like to lose either. Like, I'm the coach. When we lose, I'm losing too. And, I can get fired up and I can be, having these, outbursts, whatever. This is not what he said, but that's what he was alluding to, his sideline behavior, if you will. And Shane, sitting next to him, just like starts rubbing his shoulder as Dable's like, you have to learn to harness that and not show it. And I was just laughing to myself, because I'm like, that Shane is doing this because Dable did some questionable things on the sideline last year. So I just thought that was kind of funny to like witness that between the two of them. So let's move along to the top 100 players now. We'll start with 100 to 99 and then go down to, they're down to 80 now. So let me pull this up without pulling up the podcast, because that's not what I want. I just want the list. Okay, so here we go. Starting at number 100, we have Rich Cyber, who we all know and love. Next up, 99, is Brad Benson, another offensive lineman. Eddie Price, who I believe was a running back. Hakeem Nicks, we all know and love. Incredible wide receiver. Willie Williams, he's number 96. Hakeem Nicks was number 97. 95, Saquon, which I actually heard from one of the beat writers, Chris Bisignano from the Giant Insider, said on his most recent podcast episode that when Saquon found out that he was on this list and he was number 95, that he was very surprised and humbled by it. Take with that as you will. Number 94, Eric Howard. Number 93, Terry Kennard. Number 92, Darrell Dess. 91, kicker Lawrence Tynes, Super Bowl winner. 90, Aaron Thomas. 89, Jason Sehorn. I want to stop here for a second because I think there might be a little bit of outrage here. I think narrowing down this list has to be virtually impossible. They have a million players that they have to go through spanning 100 years. You can't just pick the guys that won Super Bowls, right? So Jason Sehorn, we all know, was an incredible Giant, very talented player. So I I think the fact that him being, 89, makes me just very interested to see who is going to be on the rest of the list and where they are, because he was so good and so many Giants fans, like across the board, everyone loved him and knew how talented he was. So can you only imagine who all these other numbers are? Speaking of, number 88, Howard Cross, tight end for the Giants, all loved him. 87, Corey Webster. 86, Eric Barnes. 85, Dave Meggett. 84, Ahmad Bradshaw. 83, Kerry Collins. 82, Kareem McKenzie, and 81 is Frank Cope. So that's who the Giants have so far. If you have any disagreements, let me know in the comments. I will be back next week with another episode. We will recap Hard Knocks episode 3 and then talk about training camp, which is going to be here less than 2 weeks away. Very excited. As a reminder, if you've not gotten your tickets yet, they should still be available. Giants.com/training camp. They are free. Reserve them in advance, but I'm very excited. It's going to be super fun. Can't wait to see you guys there. So I will be back next week. Talk to you soon.